You might have to have a difficult conversation with President Trump if he looks you in the eye and says, well, Tulsi, do you think I had the 2020 election stolen? Yes or no?
There's so much that went into the rigging of that 2020 election that started in 2016. So I think when whether it's he or others are looking at what happened in 2020, and I talk about this in the book, is how investigations were launched based on no evidence, claims about Russian interference that were funded by Hillary Clinton. These things began during the 2016 election, and they didn't stop after he won. They continued throughout his presidency in what was essentially this slow-rolling coup that was trying to make him impotent as a president and unable to carry out the things that he ran on. And, you know, look, there were things I agreed on, things I disagreed on. That's not really the point here. The point is that in the protection of our democracy, we can't have people politicizing and weaponizing our own government to try to manipulate the outcome of the election and not respect the wishes of the American people.
But I would agree with you about the Russia collusion bullshit, which is what it was. I called that at the start. I called it during. I called it at the end. I thought the suppression of the New York Post story about Hunter Biden's laptop was an outrage and a clear partisan outrage. There are many things I'm sure that I would agree with you about. But when I sat with President Trump for this show, I said to him, look, there's just no actual evidence that to his central claim that there was vote rigging which cost him the election. That has not been proven, and we now know that is not the case. You know, you've had many Republican judges conclude the same thing. And people will ask you, they'll say, come on, Tulsi, you're a smart person. You've had a very wide and varied career. You must accept, or maybe you don't, but I'll give you the chance to clarify. You must accept that on that, President Trump is simply wrong. The election was not stolen by vote rigging. There are other arguments that there was a narrative about Russia and about laptops and so on, which had an adverse effect, and I totally accept that, but not on the vote rigging. Do you accept that?
Yeah, and I think those issues that we're talking about, those bigger issues, should be more of a focus and more of a concern because they had a much greater impact. I have not seen the evidence that you're talking about with regard to the 2020 election day results itself, but I also think it's important to point out that there are valid concerns about election integrity that need to be addressed. When I was in Congress and I lived in Washington, D.C., every election day that came around, we bought our house from an estate. The former owners had passed away, and so every election day that came around, 2 years, 4 years, 6 years after we'd already been living there, we got absentee ballots for the former owners who had passed away many years before. It would have been very easy to fill out those ballots and send them in. So when people, I think it's important to point this out, that when people raise concerns around the integrity of our elections, they should not be so easily dismissed. I introduced legislation when I was in Congress that would have mandated the use of paper ballots or a verifiable paper backup if you're using a cold electronic system not connected to the internet in any way. Unfortunately, leaders in Congress on both sides, they were unwilling to take action that would direct states to provide this auditable paper trail to ensure that we can increase the confidence of voters that the vote that they are casting is the vote that's being counted.
A system can always be improved, but the American electoral system is actually, I would argue, the most secure in the world and the best in the world. Obviously, everything can be improved, but I also think you talk about integrity of elections. It's also important, I think, for any presidential candidate in America, or someone aspiring as you did to be vice president of the country, that you've got to accept the peaceful transfer of power. You have to accept when you've lost. You know, one of my big frustrations with Donald Trump is that there are many qualities that Donald Trump has. He's got an unbelievable thick skin to be able to soak up all this stuff and keep powering on. I've never seen anything quite like it. A lot of the policy stuff he did I thought was very effective. A lot of the rhetoric, less so, but he would argue, well, that's part of what he is, and I get that. But on this stolen election thing, which led, of course, to the terrible scenes on January the 6th and so on, it is incumbent, isn't it, on all candidates and all people who want to be president or vice president that you accept the result of an election.
It is, and it is also incumbent upon, we have systems in place. If you have concerns about the validity of the outcome of a vote count in a certain state, there are systems in place, as there should be, to ensure that those votes that were cast are actually being counted accurately. So the question being posed right now is to Donald Trump and to others, will you accept the outcome of the 2024 election? It's legitimate to say, well, yes. However, if there are concerns, we have a system in place to check those concerns. And when those checks and balances have been done, the people's voices have been heard, and you accept the outcome of that election.
Yes. I'm glad you said that.
Check out my book, For Love of Country, for sale right now at tulsigabbard.com. And you can also order the audiobook that I narrated on Audible.